Picture this, the sun blazing over a dusty plain in ancient Greece, where the air crackles with anticipation. Thousands have gathered not for war, not for trade, but for a spectacle of human strength, speed, and spirit. Here, in a valley called Olympia, the very first Olympic Games are about to begin. But these aren't the Olympics you know today. There are no corporate sponsors, no flashing scoreboards, just pure, unfiltered competition, where the prize is a simple wreath of olive leaves and a legacy that echoes through eternity. How did this humble festival, born from myth and ceremony, become the global phenomenon we celebrate now? The answer is a tapestry woven with gods and heroes, politics and peace, and a vision of unity that somehow survived the rise and fall of empires. Think about the modern Olympics for a moment. The roaring crowds, the world records shattered, the tears of triumph. Now strip all that away and you'll find something even more extraordinary at the core. A tradition so ancient it predates the Parthenon, the Roman Empire, even the written word itself. The original games weren't just about athleticism. They were a sacred ritual, a truce between warring cities and a tribute to Zeus himself. Athletes competed naked, judges enforced rules with divine authority, and cheating could mean public flogging or fines so heavy they'd fund entire statues of the gods. This was a world where victory wasn't just personal, it was cosmic. And yet somehow, the spirit of those games still pulses through every Olympiad we hold today. So what secrets lie buried in those early contests? Why did a single race, barely 200 meters long, become the centerpiece of an event that would captivate humanity for? And how did a festival meant to honor Zeus evolve into a symbol of global unity? Over the next minutes, we'll peel back the layers of history to reveal the lost truths of the Olympics, from the mythological origins involving Hercules and Pelops, to the political machinations that turned athletes into pawns, to the startling parallels between ancient and modern rituals. You'll discover how the games survived bans, scandals, and even the collapse of civilizations, only to emerge stronger than ever. This isn't just a story of sports. It's a story of us, of what happens when humanity dares to reach for something greater. So let's step onto the sacred grounds of Olympia together and uncover the hidden legacy of the world's oldest and most enduring celebration of human potential. Long before the first runner crossed the finish line at Olympia, the gods themselves were said to have shaped the games. One legend claims Hercules himself marked the length of the original stadium by pacing out 600 feet, a distance that would become the very first Olympic event, the race. But the myths don't stop there. Another story whispers that Zeus founded the games to commemorate his victory over Cronus, a divine showdown that split mountains and reshaped the heavens. Whether born from a demigod's footsteps or a god's triumph, these origins weren't just tales. They were the beating heart of the early Olympics. Athletes didn't merely train, they prepared like holy warriors, offering sacrifices at the altar of Zeus and swearing oaths over the charred remains of sacrificial bulls. To cheat wasn't just dishonorable, it was blasphemy, punishable by fines that funded bronze statues of the gods, each one engraved with the offender's shame for all eternity. The sacred aura of Olympia was undeniable. Towering over the athletic grounds stood the Temple of Zeus, housing one of the seven wonders of the ancient world. A colossal statue of the god, seated on a throne of gold and ivory, so lifelike pilgrims claimed it could thunder. Competitors raced and wrestled not just for glory, but to honor him, their sweat and struggle a form of worship. Even the olive wreath awarded to victors pulsed with symbolism, its branches cut from a sacred tree supposedly planted by Hercules, their leaves a covenant between mortal achievement and divine favor. This wasn't just sport as we know it today. It was a covenant with the cosmos, where every leap, every throw, every straining muscle was a prayer in motion. Yet for all their spiritual weight, the games were also startlingly human. The myths may have lit the flame, but it was politics, pride, and raw ambition that kept it burning. City-states poured resources into training their champions, desperate for the prestige of victory. Winners returned home not as mere athletes, but as living legends. They're often tearing down sections of city walls to welcome them, a symbolic gesture declaring that a place capable of such heroes needed no fortifications. The line between sacred ritual and earthly rivalry blurred constantly, proving that even in antiquity, the Olympics were never just about the gods. They were about us, our hunger for excellence, our thirst for recognition, and our timeless need to believe that greatness, whether forged by Hercules or a humble sprinter, could touch the divine. The year was 776 before the Common Era, when history finally caught up with legend. On that plain in Olympia, under the watchful gaze of priests and the gods themselves, a single event marked the birth of something extraordinary. The race, a sprint of just 192 meters, was all it took to ignite a tradition that would outlast civilizations. Imagine the scene: no starting pistols, no lane markers, just a line scratched in the earth and a crowd holding its breath as the fastest men in Greece lunged forward. The winner's prize. Not gold or silver, but a simple crown woven from olive branches, its leaves plucked from a tree behind the temple of Zeus. Yet that humble wreath carried more weight than any modern medal, because to wear it meant your name would be carved into official records, the first names in a ledger that would stretch across 12 centuries. What's astonishing isn't just the simplicity of those early games, but how quickly they became indispensable. Within a generation, Olympia transformed from a local religious festival into a pan-Hellenic phenomenon. City-states postponed wars to let their athletes travel safely, honoring the sacred truce known as the wars could wait, politics could simmer, but the Olympics, they were non-negotiable. And while we might picture ancient athletes as amateurs, the truth is far more intriguing. These men, for only men could compete, were professionals in every sense, trained from childhood with the same intensity as modern Olympians. The difference: their training wasn't just physical. Poets composed verses to perfect their rhythm, philosophers taught them to endure pain, and every stride they took was measured against the footsteps of heroes. Yet for all their reverence, the early games weren't without controversy. Take the very first recorded champion of Eli's, a cook by trade who supposedly trained by running back and forth between his kitchen and the local agora. His victory proved something revolutionary. Greatness wasn't reserved for nobles or warriors. It could come from anywhere. That idea, more than any race or record, became the Olympics' true legacy. Because while the may seem quaint compared to today's 100-meter dash, the questions it raised still echo. What makes a champion? Who gets to compete? And how far are we willing to go, not just as athletes, but as a society, to honor those who push human limits? The answers began here in the dust of that first stadium, where a cook-turned-sprinter became immortal not for what he won, but for what he started. By the next Olympiad, new events had already joined the program: wrestling, boxing, chariot races, each one layering complexity onto the games. But none could match the purity of that original race, where speed alone decided everything. No judges' scores, no equipment failures, just raw human effort measured against the unforgiving stretch of sand. It's a reminder that even as the Olympics grew into the elaborate spectacle we know today, their soul remained stubbornly simple. A test, a triumph, and the unshakable belief that for one fleeting moment, a person could touch something timeless. To understand the power of Olympia, you have to see it not as a sports venue, but as a city of the gods. Picture walking past the towering temple of Hera, where the original Olympic flame once burned, then rounding a corner to face the workshop of Phidias, the sculptor who chiseled Zeus's legendary statue from ivory and gold. This wasn't just a place to run and wrestle. It was a living, breathing monument to divine and human achievement intertwined. The stadium itself sat empty most of the time, a silent oval of packed earth until the games began. But the surrounding complex, always alive with priests tending sacred fires, athletes training in the palaestra's shaded courtyards, and ambassadors negotiating under olive trees. Because Olympia was as much a political stage as an athletic one. The Olympic Truce transformed these grounds into neutral territory, where sworn enemies could stand shoulder to shoulder without bloodshed. Imagine Spartan and Athenian warriors, their cities locked in perpetual conflict, suddenly bound by a shared oath. No weapons, no warfare, just the purity of competition. Messengers called would fan out across Greece months in advance, announcing the truce like human heralds of peace. Roads became safe, borders opened, and for those weeks the only battles fought were on the racetrack or the wrestling pit. It's a concept so radical even modern Olympics struggle to replicate it, because back then, breaking the truce didn't just mean disqualification. It meant divine wrath. Architecture told the story best. A circular monument of gleaming marble stood as a reminder that even kings bowed to Olympia's authority, built by Alexander the Great's father to celebrate his military victories, yet placed humbly among the temples. Nearby, the statues lined the path to the stadium, bronze figures funded by fines from cheaters, their bases inscribed with warnings to future athletes. Every corner of the sanctuary whispered the same lesson. Here, mortal ambitions were measured against something eternal. Today, wandering Olympia's ruins, you can still trace the grooves where chariots turned too sharply, or run your fingers over stone inscriptions listing winners from 2,000 years ago. But the real magic isn't in the stones, it's in realizing how much the ancient Greeks believed in this ideal. They built a place where war could wait, where a farmer's son could outrun nobility, and where victory wasn't just about crossing a line first, but about honoring something greater than yourself. That's why the echoes here feel so loud. Not because of the crowds that once roared, but because the world they created, however briefly, was the one we're still trying to rebuild. While the race may have been the Olympics' beating heart, the games quickly grew into something far more visceral, a showcase of raw power, cunning, and sheer endurance that would make even modern athletes pause. Take wrestling, where competitors grappled in the scorching sand, their bodies slick with olive oil to make escapes harder. Victory came only when one man forced the other to concede or threw him 3 times. No time limits, no weight classes, just bone-crushing technique passed down from soldiers and hunters. Then there was boxing, a far cry from today's regulated matches. Fighters wrapped their fists in leather straps called, often embedded with metal or lead, turning punches into brutal hammer strikes. The matches continued until one fighter collapsed or raised a finger in surrender, leaving the sand stained with more than just sweat. But nothing compared to pankration, the ancient world's most feared event. Translating to all powers, this brutal hybrid of boxing and wrestling banned only 2 actions, biting and eye gouging. Everything else, joint locks, chokeholds, kicks to the ribs, was fair game. Legends tell of competitors dying mid-match, their bodies carried out as the crowd roared. Yet for all its violence, pankration demanded strategy as much as strength. Fighters trained for years to master its deadly ballet, knowing a single misstep could mean a snapped arm or worse. The event's very existence reveals a truth about the ancient Olympics. They weren't just games. They were survival skills dressed as sport, where the line between athlete and warrior blurred completely. Chariot racing offered a different kind of danger, one where speed and chaos collided. Imagine 40 horses thundering down the hippodrome, their drivers whipping them mercilessly as wheels clipped each other at full tilt. Crashes were routine, often deadly, yet the real risk fell not to the drivers but to their wealthy owners. Like modern Formula One team principals, these patrons poured fortunes into breeding the fastest horses and hiring the boldest jockeys. The twist: only the owners received the olive wreaths, not the drivers who risked their lives. It was a stark reminder that even in antiquity, glory and gold were rarely separated. What's fascinating is how these events mirrored Greek society itself. Wrestling and boxing honed skills useful in battle, pankration tested the limits of human endurance, and chariot racing flaunted the wealth and influence of elites. Yet poets like Pindar immortalized victors in odes comparing them to gods, while sculptors captured their physiques in marble, proof that athleticism and artistry were two sides of the same coin. The diversity of events ensured every city-state had something to strive for, whether it was Sparta dominating the combat sports or Athens shining in equestrian events. The stakes higher than you might think. Winners didn't just go home with wreath, they often received lifetime pensions, free meals, and front row seats at public festivals. Some cities even carved their likenesses into sacred groves, turning athletes into living monuments. But lose dishonorably, say, by quitting mid-match, and you might face a punishment worse than defeat, public shame, fines, or statues of your failure funded by your own coin. This wasn't just about personal glory. It was about proving your city's superiority in a world where physical prowess and divine favor walked hand in hand. Perhaps that's why the ancient Olympics feels so familiar today. Strip away the chariots and the olive oil and you'll find the same essence: the hunger to push limits, the thrill of competition, and the unspoken promise that here, for these fleeting moments, ordinary people can become legends. The events may have changed, but the fire they lit, that still burns. At the heart of Olympia's roaring crowds and dust-choked arenas pulsed something far deeper than sport. A sacred current so powerful, it turned every sprint, every throw into an act of devotion. The games didn't just honor Zeus, they channeled him. Before competition, athletes stood barefoot before his towering ivory statue, its eyes seemingly tracking their every move as they swore oaths over the smoking entrails of sacrificed bulls. To break these vows wasn't merely cheating, it was sacrilege, punishable by fines so steep they funded rows of bronze statues known as, each one a permanent indictment of the offender's shame. These weren't empty rituals. The Greeks believed victory itself flowed from the gods' whims, transforming athletes into living conduits between Earth and Olympus. Consider the story of Milo of Croton, a six-time wrestling champion whose legend blurred the lines between mortal and divine. Ancient texts claim he trained by carrying a newborn calf daily until it grew into a full-grown bull, a feat echoing Hercules' labors. When he finally succumbed to defeat, the crowd didn't just mourn a loss, they whispered of withdrawn favor, as if Zeus himself had turned his gaze elsewhere. This spiritual dimension elevated victors beyond athletic prowess. Their olive wreaths came from trees behind Zeus's temple, cut with a golden sickle by a boy whose parents both had to be alive, a symbol of unbroken divine blessing. To wear that crown was to carry a fragment of the sacred grove itself. Yet religion here wasn't just about reverence, it was governance. The judges clad in purple robes like high priests wielded authority straight from Olympus. They could flog athletes for false starts, disqualify entire city-states for bribery, and even strip past victories from those later exposed as cheats. Their decisions carried the weight of prophecy, backed by an elaborate system of divination. Before events, priests scrutinized the livers of sacrificed animals for auspicious marks. Unfavorable signs could delay races for hours. This fusion of ritual and rulebook created something unprecedented, a sporting event where every jump, every throw existed within a cosmic framework. The sacred truce reveals how deeply spirituality shaped the game's practical reality. For 7 days before and after the Olympics, wars paused, debts froze, and executions halted as Greece entered a state of divinely mandated peace. Messengers called traversed battlefields unharmed, their staffs twined with olive leaves like mobile temples. Even Sparta, famed for relentless militarism, honored this ceasefire. The truce wasn't just practical logistics. It was a shared acknowledgement that some things transcended human conflict, that for these fleeting weeks, the gods demanded unity. Archaeologists still find remnants of this devotion in Olympia's soil, tiny lead tablets inscribed with curses against rival athletes, buried near starting lines where Zeus might overhear. Statue bases bear inscriptions thanking gods for victory, while others list fines paid by those who dared strike opponents illegally during sacred matches. Every artifact whispers the same truth: these weren't games in our modern sense. They were a covenant where sweat on sand became prayer, where the roar of the crowd mingled with hymns, and where a simple could, for one shimmering moment, make mortals taste the divine. What's remarkable isn't just how religion permeated the Olympics, but how it shaped their longevity. When earthquakes toppled Zeus's statue and invaders plundered the temples, the games endured because they were never just about a place or even a god. They were about humanity's oldest yearning, to reach beyond ourselves to touch something eternal. That flame still burns today, not in the torches we pass, but in the unshakable belief that when we push our limits, we honor something greater. The stadiums may have marble now and the prizes corporate logos, but deep down, every Olympian still runs toward that same sacred finish line. The ancient Olympic arena was a world stripped bare, not just of clothing but of pretense. Here, under the blistering Greek sun, only freeborn men of Hellenic blood could step onto the sacred sands, their unclothed bodies a deliberate tribute to the gods' perfect designs. This wasn't mere tradition, it was dogma. Foreigners, enslaved people, and women stood outside the ropes, physically and symbolically excluded from what the Greeks called the noble struggle. Yet within these rigid boundaries thrived an athletic culture so intense, it would make modern training camps seem tame. Boys as young as 12 were drafted into rigorous regimens, running through sand with weighted vests, wrestling under the gaze of retired champions, their diets monitored like sacred texts. The palestra, or training grounds, echoed with the slaps of oil on skin and the grunts of men pushing past exhaustion, all for a shot at immortality. Women faced an even starker divide. Barred from competing or even spectating at the Olympics under penalty of death, legend claims offenders were thrown from mount, they forged their own legacy. Every 4 years, just beyond the men's games, the games unfolded in honor of Hera, Zeus's queen. Young girls sprinted in tunics with their hair unbound, their victories celebrated with olive wreaths and portions of sacrificial cows. While the events were fewer and the crowds smaller, the symbolism was profound. In a society that cloistered women, these races were a rare crack in the armor, a fleeting acknowledgement of female physicality. The poet Pindar immortalized one such victor, noting how her speed outran even the whispers of doubt. The training methods of ancient athletes reveal a startling sophistication. Coaches like of Athens, who produced multiple Olympic champions, documented techniques we'd recognize today: interval running, progressive overload and weight training, even mental visualization exercises where athletes rehearsed victories in their minds. Spartan contenders endured brutal drills like the nightmarish endurance tests in the wilderness, while Theban fighters sparred with iron-weighted gloves to build bone density. Nutrition was equally advanced. Champion Milo of Croton reportedly consumed 20 pounds of meat daily, washed down with wine mixed with chalk for calcium, a primitive version of modern protein shakes. Yet for all their physical prowess, ancient Olympians were bound by social chains modern athletes would find unthinkable. A victorious Spartan might be granted the honor of fighting beside his king in battle, but an enslaved person, no matter how gifted, could never taste that glory. Wealthy patrons often claimed credit for their wins, much like chariot owners eclipsing their drivers. And while today's Olympics tout unity, the ancient games reinforced Greek superiority. Non-Greeks like the Macedonians had to prove their Hellenic lineage before competing, a prejudice that fueled tensions for centuries. What emerges is a paradox, a celebration of human potential that was simultaneously expansive and exclusionary. The nakedness of competitors wasn't just about fairness or homage to the gods. It was a badge of privilege, a visual declaration that only certain bodies belonged. Yet from this flawed crucible came ideals that still shape sports today: the pursuit of excellence, the cult of the champion, the belief that physical achievement can transcend the everyday. The road from those oiled, sun-baked athletes to Biles or Bolt is longer than the marathon itself, but the torch they carry. That flame was lit in Olympia's imperfect, uncompromising arena. The exclusion of women, foreigners, and the enslaved stains the Olympic origin story, but it also sharpens our understanding of how far the games have evolved. When we watch sprinters from 100 nations line up today, or see weightlifters of all genders shatter records, we're witnessing the slow, hard-fought unraveling of ancient prejudices. Those early games may have been a mirror of Greek societal hierarchies, but they also planted a seed, one that insisted human achievement deserved a stage. The stage itself had to grow, the competitors had to diversify, but the essential idea that greatness demands witnesses survived every era, every ban, every revolution. That's the true relay race of history, passing the baton from the exclusive to the universal, one Olympiad at a time. The Olympic Truce wasn't just a pause in hostilities, it was a seismic shift in how ancient societies viewed conflict. Imagine this. For 7 days before and after the games, messengers called fanned out across Greece, their staffs wrapped in olive leaves like living peace treaties. City-states locked in generations-long feuds suddenly sheathed their swords. Armies stood down, prisoners were exchanged, and even executions were postponed. This wasn't mere diplomacy, it was a sacred obligation enforced by the fear of divine retribution. Violators faced exclusion from future games and worse, the wrath of Zeus himself. The truce transformed Olympia into a neutral zone where Spartan and Athenian, Corinthian and Theban could stand shoulder to shoulder, their rivalry confined to the racetrack. What's staggering is how seriously this was taken. Historical records show that during the Persian Wars, when massive invasion force threatened Greece, several city-states still sent athletes to Olympia rather than recalling them for battle. The message was clear. Some traditions outweighed even survival. The truce's power lay in its universality. No kingdom, no matter how powerful, dared defy it. When King Philip of Soldiers once ambushed a convoy of Athenian athletes, a grave violation, the resulting outrage forced him to pay hefty reparations and publicly apologize. His son, Alexander the Great, later reinforced the truce meticulously, understanding its symbolic value in uniting his fractured empire. Modern parallels abound. The United Nations revives the concept during each Olympiad, urging global ceasefires, though with mixed success. Where ancient Greeks feared divine punishment, today's world lacks such unifying deterrence. Yet the ideal persists because it speaks to something primal, the hope that competition can transcend destruction. Ancient Olympia proved, however briefly, that enemies could share not just space but purpose. Athletes who'd soon return to battlefields now raced as equals, their victories celebrated by former foes. The truce didn't end wars, but it rewrote the rules, declaring that some grounds were too sacred for bloodshed. Archaeologists have found bronze tablets detailing truce agreements, their language echoing modern peace accords. One inscription from the 3rd century before the Common Era lists terms like safe passage for pilgrims and immunity for ambassadors, proof that the truce was as much legal innovation as religious edict. These weren't vague ideals, they were enforceable statutes with penalties ranging from fines to exile. The system worked because every city-state had skin in the game. Exclusion from the games meant losing access to the ultimate stage for prestige and propaganda. Perhaps the truce's most enduring legacy is how it redefined strength. In a world that glorified military conquest, the Olympics carved out a space where glory came from discipline, not destruction. When a Spartan victor was asked whether he'd rather win a battle or an Olympic crown, he chose the wreath, because battles produced corpses, while Olympia produced legends. That tension between warrior and athlete cultures simmered throughout Greek history, but for those sacred weeks, the latter always won. The truce wasn't naive, it was revolutionary, proving that even in antiquity, humanity could, when given the right incentives, choose laurels over laurels of war. Today, as conflicts rage worldwide, the ancient truce feels both quaint and radical. We've kept the flame relays and medal ceremonies but struggle to uphold the deeper ethos, that sports can be a language beyond borders. The original truce worked because it was rooted in shared mythology and mutual fear. Recreating that magic in our secular, fragmented world remains elusive. Yet every time nations march together under the Olympic flag or North and South Korea field joint teams, we glimpse that ancient ideal, not perfect, not permanent, but proof that the arena can still be mightier than the battlefield. The glory of Olympia wasn't meant to last forever. After 1,200 years of crowning champions, the Games faced their greatest opponent, not a rival athlete, but the shifting tides of history itself. As Rome's shadow stretched across Greece, the Olympics began to change in ways that would have horrified their founders. Emperors like Nero, hungry for prestige, twisted the sacred contests into vanity projects, adding events just so they could compete and inevitably declare themselves winners. Nero's infamous victory in the chariot race came after he was thrown from his vehicle and failed to finish, yet judges still awarded him the wreath. This wasn't just corruption, it was a slow poisoning of the game's soul. But the true death knell came from an unexpected direction: religion. By the 4th century of the Common Era, Christianity had swept through the Roman Empire, and its leaders viewed Olympia's pagan rituals as dangerous heresy. The very things that once made the games sacred, sacrifices to Zeus, statues of nude athletes, the divine aura of competition, now marked them for destruction. In 393, Emperor I delivered the final blow, outlawing all pagan festivals, including the Olympics. The decree wasn't just about sports, it was a cultural reset, an attempt to erase the old gods from memory. The aftermath was heartbreaking. Temples were dismantled, their stones hauled away to build Christian churches. The workshop where Phidias sculpted Zeus's wonder of the world became a makeshift stable. Earthquakes and floods buried the stadium under layers of silt, and Olympia, once a beacon for all Greece, vanished beneath vineyards and sheep pastures. Yet even in ruin, the games refused to die completely. Folk races and local contests kept the spirit alive in mountain villages, where old men still told stories of champions who could outrun horses. Byzantine emperors occasionally hosted Olympic chariot races in Constantinople, though the connection to ancient tradition was threadbare at best. What's remarkable isn't just that the Olympics ended, but how thoroughly they were nearly erased. Medieval scholars, when they mentioned Olympia at all, described it as a mythic place, no more real than Atlantis. For over 1,000 years, the very idea of reviving the games seemed impossible, a dream as distant as Zeus's thunderbolts. And yet, the seeds of rebirth were already taking root. Monks in remote monasteries preserved manuscripts detailing Olympic victories, while Renaissance artists sketched imagined reconstructions of Olympia's grandeur. The world forgot the games, but it couldn't quite unlearn them. The fall of the ancient Olympics wasn't just the loss of a sporting event. It was the unraveling of an idea that humanity could set aside war, if only for a few weeks, to celebrate something higher. When banned the games, he didn't just silence the crowds in Olympia. He silenced a 1,000-year conversation about what it means to strive, to honor, to transcend. But ideas, like olive trees, have deep roots. And though the ancient games lay dormant for centuries, their roots were waiting patiently for the right moment to sprout again. For over 1,000 years, Olympia slept beneath layers of earth and forgetting, until one determined archaeologist's shovel struck marble in the spring of 1829. What emerged from the dirt wasn't just ruins, it was a resurrection. French excavators led by Abel uncovered the temple of Zeus's fallen columns first, their weathered drums strewn like broken teeth across the landscape. With each season's dig, more of the sanctuary materialized. The palestra's mosaic floors, the stadium's starting line grooves, even the workshop where Phidias had sculpted Zeus's wonder. These weren't artifacts behind glass. They were the very stones ancient athletes had touched, their sweat and footprints still haunting the dust. The world took notice. Scholars had long debated whether the Olympics were myth or history, but here was irrefutable proof. Bronze votive offerings inscribed with victors' names, judges' tablets detailing fines for fouls, even the remnants of olive wreaths preserved in the alkaline soil. Suddenly, Pindar's odes weren't just poetry, they were reporting. What stunned archaeologists most wasn't the scale of Olympia, but its intimacy. The stadium, when cleared, measured just 200 meters end to end, shorter than many modern tracks. Yet this modest stretch of packed earth had hosted legends whose echoes now shook the 19th century awake. Among those echoes was a French aristocrat named Pierre who walked Olympia's ruins in 1890. As he traced the stadium's curves with his cane, something clicked. The ancient games hadn't just been about sport, they'd been a crucible for character, a forge where discipline and fair play tempered young minds. In an era of industrialization and looming wars, saw a beacon, a way to unite nations not through bloodshed but through shared striving. His vision took root in Athens 6 years later, when the first modern Olympics lit their flame just miles from where his team had unearthed history. The excavation's influence stretched beyond symbolism. Architects studying Olympia's layout adopted its open-air stadium design, rejecting the enclosed Roman amphitheaters that had dominated European sports. The discovery of the Hermes of Praxiteles, a statue so lifelike its sandals seemed to dent the marble, revolutionized art history, proving Greek sculptors had achieved near-photographic realism centuries before the Renaissance. Even the modern marathon's distance traces back to Olympia. When planners needed a route for the 1896 race, they measured the fabled run from Marathon to Athens, then added extra meters to reach the Olympic Stadium's track. Yet the greatest gift of Spade wasn't marble or bronze, it was perspective. Standing among those ruins, it became clear how much had been lost when banned the games. Not just competitions, but a philosophy, that physical excellence could be sacred, that rivalry needn't mean enmity, that peace was possible if humanity agreed on the rules. The modern Olympics would struggle to uphold these ideals through 2 world wars, boycotts, and scandals, but the blueprint was there, waiting in the dirt. Every 4 years, when the torch relay begins at Olympia's restored altar, it's more than ceremony. It's a handshake across, a promise that some flames, once lit, refuse to stay buried. Today, walking Olympia's excavated paths, you can still feel the ghosts. Here, where the tunnel to the stadium remains intact, you half expect to hear the slap of bare feet as athletes sprint toward glory. There, beside the statues, the warnings against cheating still resonate in an era of doping scandals. The ruins don't just connect us to the past, they hold up a mirror. When we see how much the ancients got right and how much we've forgotten, the real excavation begins. Not of stones, but of the ideals we buried beneath nationalism and profit. Olympia's greatest lesson isn't that the games died. It's that they waited, patient as the olive groves, for us to remember why they mattered. Pierre wasn't just a dreamer. He was a man obsessed with time travel. Not the sci-fi kind, but the sort that stitches centuries together through sheer force of will. As a young French aristocrat in the late 19th century, he wandered through Europe's schools and found them lacking, too rigid, too focused on books, and not enough on the kind of character forged in competition. Then he stumbled upon Olympia's ruins and everything clicked. What if the answer to modern strife lay in an ancient idea, Not the Olympics as they'd become under Nero's corruption, but as they were at their, a gathering where rivalry bred respect, not war. His vision was radical for its time. In 1894, he stood before a skeptical audience at the Sorbonne, pitching the impossible, a global sporting event modeled on a 2,000-year-old tradition. Critics scoffed. How could a Frenchman revive a Greek legacy? What place did discus throws have in the age of steam engines, but had a diplomat's cunning? He framed the games as a peace project, appealing to the era's hunger for progress. When he proposed Athens as the first host, it wasn't just nostalgia, it was theater, a symbolic homecoming that even the most cynical couldn't resist. The 1896 Olympics were a shoestring miracle. Greece, nearly bankrupt, crowdfunded the event through donations and postage stamps. The stadium, rebuilt from Pentelic marble, lacked seats. Spectators sat on the bare stone. Yet when the opening ceremony began, something electric crackled in the air. 241 athletes from 14 nations marched in, not under flags, but as individuals. The discus and marathon, events plucked straight from antiquity, shared the program with modern additions like cycling and fencing. The blend was deliberate, wanted the games to be a bridge, not a museum. But his idealism faced immediate tests. Political tensions simmered beneath the surface. German gymnasts hesitated to compete under Greece's king, while American competitors were accused of being too professional for the amateur spirit cherished. Yet for every friction, there were moments of pure alchemy, like when Louis, a Greek water carrier, won the marathon in front of a weeping crowd, his victory uniting a nation still smarting from centuries of occupation. Or when Germany's Karl, a 4'11" gymnast, dominated wrestling against taller opponents, proving that heart could outweigh muscle. His legacy is a paradox. He preached amateurism, yet birthed the world's most professionalized sporting event. He championed unity, but excluded women from competing until 1900, calling their athletics indecent. His vision was flawed, human, and utterly transformative. Today, when athletes from warring nations shake hands on the podium, or when a refugee team marches into the stadium, we see glimpses of what he imagined. Not a perfect world, but one where competition defies division. The modern Olympics may have their founders' quirks, but the flame he lit, that still burns bright. The 1896 Athens Olympics might have been small in scale, but they were colossal in symbolism. That first marathon, a grueling 40 kilometers from the town of Marathon to Athens Stadium, wasn't just a race, it was a reenactment of legend. According to lore, a Greek messenger named Phidippides had run that same route in 490 before the Common Era to announce victory over the Persians before collapsing dead. Now, centuries later, 17 men lined up to retrace his steps under the Mediterranean sun. The crowd's roar when local water carrier Louis entered the stadium first wasn't just cheers, it was catharsis. Greece, a nation still shaking off Ottoman rule, had reclaimed a piece of its soul. Louis' victory lap became the stuff of instant myth, with spectators throwing jewelry and gifts at his feet, as if he were a hero straight from Homer's epics. Yet the marathon was just one thread in a tapestry of revival. Take the discus throw, an event plucked straight from ancient vase paintings but utterly foreign to modern athletes. Competitors had no technique manuals, no coaches, just vague descriptions from historians. When America's Robert won with a hurl of 29 meters, it wasn't just a medal, it was archaeology in motion, proving that long-buried skills could still inspire. Even the awards ceremony nodded to tradition. Victors received silver medals, gold wouldn't debut until 1904, olive branches from Olympia's sacred grove, and diplomas hand-painted by Greek artists. Every detail whispered the same message. This wasn't imitation, but resurrection. Behind the scenes, chaos and charm collided. The swimming events held in the icy bay saw competitors hauled to the start line by rowboat. One Hungarian swimmer nearly quit mid-race after realizing the water was so cold it cramped his muscles. The fencing matches turned into linguistic puzzles. Competitors spoke different languages, so referees signaled points by waving flags. And then there was the infamous case of Germany's Karl, a gymnast who entered the wrestling event on a whim and bulldozed through opponents twice his size, proving that Olympic spirit often trumps specialization. What's easy to overlook is how precarious this experiment was. Greece's economy teetered on collapse, and many doubted the Games would outlive their debut. But when King George I closed the ceremonies by declaring the Olympics renewed forever, he wasn't just being poetic. The world had glimpsed something potent, a way to channel nationalism into something nobler. Newspapers from Paris to Chicago splashed stories of Louis' marathon triumph, turning a local race into global theater. Suddenly, cities like Louis and London began angling to host future games, sensing their power to put them on the map. The true legacy of 1896 wasn't the medals or records, but the blueprint it left. Its vision of amateurism, however flawed, established sports as a pursuit beyond money. The inclusion of both ancient and modern events set a precedent for balancing tradition with innovation. Most importantly, those 241 athletes proved that borders could blur in the name of competition. When an American triple jumper swapped his shoes with a Greek competitor who'd lost his, or when German and French fencers shared wine after dueling, they unknowingly set the tone for every Olympic village to come. The scale was modest, but the ambition, that stretched as far as the marathon route itself, from the dust of history straight into the future. The 5 interlocking rings, blue, yellow, black, green, and red, against a white background might be the most recognized symbol in global sports, yet their origin story is surprisingly modern. Pierce sketched them in 1913, 2 decades after reviving the Games, but their roots stretch back to antiquity. Dig through ancient Greek pottery and you'll find similar circular motifs, representing unity and the cyclical nature of competition. Its genius was repackaging this timeless idea for a new era. Each ring symbolizes one of the 5 continents united by the Olympic movement: Africa, the Americas, Asia, Europe, and Oceania, with the colors deliberately chosen so that every nation's flag contains at least one. It's a visual handshake, a promise that no matter how fierce the rivalry, the world shares this common ground. Then there's the torch relay, a spectacle so dramatic it feels plucked from myth. Yet this tradition didn't exist in ancient Olympia. The Greeks did light sacred flames at altars, but its team invented the relay for the 1936 Berlin Games, blending Hellenic reverence with modern pageantry. That first flame traveled from Olympia to Berlin over 12 days, carried by 3,000 runners through 7 countries. Critics called it propaganda, and in Berlin's case, they weren't wrong, but the ritual stuck because it tapped into something primal, fire as a living metaphor for legacy. Today's relays span continents, with astronauts even carrying the flame to space aboard the Soyuz rocket in 2013, proof that some symbols grow mightier with time. Perhaps no phrase captures the Olympic spirit better than Latin for faster, higher, stronger. Coined by his friend in 1895, the motto sounds ancient but reflects 19th century ideals. The Greeks had no equivalent. Their victories were measured in wreaths, not records. Yet the words resonate because they distill athletics to its essence, not just winning but transcending. When the International Olympic Committee added together in 2021, it wasn't a break from tradition but a return to the game's deepest truth. The ancient Olympics weren't just about individual glory, they were about pausing wars, sharing truces, finding commonality in competition. These symbols work because they're more than logos or slogans, they're vessels for meaning. The rings don't just represent continents, they spin like the wheels of chariots in Olympia's hippodrome. The torch isn't just a flame, It's a rekindling of the sacred fires that once burned before Zeus's statue. Even the medals, with their Greek goddess Nike on one side and host city designs on the other, are modern drachmas, paying homage to the olive wreaths of old. What's extraordinary isn't how much these emblems borrow from history, but how they've become history themselves, shaping ceremonies, protests, and moments of solidarity. When Smith and John Carlos raised black-gloved fists under the rings in 1968, or when East and West Germany marched under one flag in 1956, the symbols held. They bend but don't break, just like the ideal they represent. That for a few weeks every 2 years, the world can agree on the rules and the rules can be beautiful. The next time you see those 5 rings flicker across a screen, remember, they're not just branding. They're a 2,000-year-old conversation between what the games were and what they could be. The ancients would understood that. After all, they built Olympia not just as a stadium, but as a sanctuary where even rivals could stand under the same sky and call it sacred. The Olympic flame was meant to burn above politics, a pure symbol of human achievement untouched by borders or ideologies. Yet from their revival, the Games have been a mirror held up to the world's fractures, reflecting conflicts no amount of idealism could ignore. Take 1936 in Berlin, where its regime transformed the Olympics into a showcase for Aryan supremacy. Swastikas draped the stadium, and Nazi officials meticulously choreographed every moment, from the first torch relay, their invention, to the opening ceremony's militarized precision. Jesse Owens' 4 gold medals shattered their racist myths, but the propaganda machine rolled on, using film Olympia to blur the line between sport and statecraft. The lesson was clear. When the world gathers, politics will always find a seat in the stands. But if Berlin revealed the Olympics' vulnerability to manipulation, the Cold War proved their resilience. The 1980 Moscow and 1984 Los Angeles Games became proxy battles, with the US and Soviet Union leading reciprocal boycotts that deprived athletes of lifelong dreams. Gymnast, whose perfect tens had dazzled in 1976, wept as Romania forced her to compete in Moscow against her will. Yet even in these darkest moments, the Games offered flickers of diplomacy. Ping-pong diplomacy eased US-China tensions in the 1970s, and the 1992 Barcelona Olympics saw South Africa return after apartheid's end, its athletes marching under one flag for the first time in decades. No moment captured this duality better than 2018. As North and South Korean athletes marched together under a unification flag, the world glimpsed what had envisioned, sports as a language beyond division. The joint women's hockey team, though winless, became a living metaphor, players from enemy nations passing pucks like olive branches. Yet even this breakthrough was fraught. Critics accused the South's president of exploiting the Games for political theater, while Pyongyang used its cheer squad's choreographed chants as soft power. The Olympics didn't erase the Korean War's scars, but for 3 weeks, they carved out a space where coexistence felt possible. What makes the Olympic stage so irresistible to political actors? Partly its reach, billions of eyes trained on a single event, but also its symbolism. Victories become national allegories, losses collective wounds. When Ethiopian marathoner ran barefoot through Rome in 1960 to win gold just 24 years after his invasion of his homeland, it wasn't just a race, it was decolonization in motion. Similarly, Freeman's 400-meter victory at Sydney 2000, under a spotlight that set her Aboriginal and Australian flags aflame, became a reckoning with Indigenous pain. The Games amplify stories that might otherwise go unheard, for better or worse. This entanglement isn't a bug of the Olympics, it's a feature. From ancient times when city-states used victories to assert dominance, to today, where every medal count is parsed like an election result, sports and statecraft have been inseparable. The difference now is scale. A sprinter's doping scandal can trigger diplomatic incidents. A host city's labor practices face global scrutiny. Yet amid the noise, the core tension remains. Can competition forge connections politics cannot? The answer, like so much in Olympic history, lies somewhere between the ideal and the real, between the flame's purity and the hands that carry it. The ancient Olympics were a world of oiled skin and straining muscle, but only if that skin was male. Women couldn't compete, couldn't even spectate unless they were the priestess of Demeter, watching from her solitary marble throne. Fast forward to Paris in 1900, where a quiet revolution unfolded. 22 women stepped onto the Olympic stage for the first time, competing in genteel events like croquet and tennis. The patriarchs of the era dismissed it as a novelty, but the dam had cracked. By 1928, women were running their own 100-meter dash, though officials fretted the distance might be too strenuous. When American sprinter won gold, her victory didn't just break the tape. It shattered the myth that female athletes were too delicate for real competition. Yet progress came in fits and starts. For decades, the International Olympic Committee clung to archaic rules, barring women from races longer than 200 meters until 1960 and denying them marathons until 1984. The excuses ranged from paternalistic, their uteruses might fall out, to outright absurd, they'll grow mustaches. Meanwhile, pioneers like Fanny Blankers, a 30-year-old Dutch mother of two, dominated the 1948 Games, winning 4 golds in track and field while silencing critics who claimed motherhood and athletics couldn't coexist. Her legacy paved the way for icons like, whose perfect 10s in gymnastics at just 14 proved that grace and grit weren't gendered traits, and who overcame polio to become the first American woman to win 3 golds in a single Olympics. The real turning point came with Title IX in 1972, the U.S. law mandating equal funding for women's sports. Suddenly, generations of girls had access to training, scholarships, and legitimacy. The results were seismic. By the 1990s, the U.S. women's soccer team wasn't just winning golds, they were packing stadiums. Names like Hom and Williams became shorthand for excellence, their achievements forcing global recognition that women's sports weren't a sideshow, but the main event. Today, the Olympic landscape is nearly unrecognizable from its origins. Women box, wrestle, and pole vault, events once deemed unladylike. The 2020 Tokyo Games marked the first near-gender parity, with 49% female competitors. Yet even now, shadows linger. Female athletes still face scrutiny over uniforms, testosterone levels, and whether they smile enough. When swimmer demolishes records by staggering margins, commentators still fixate on her elegant stroke rather than her unmatched endurance. And in some nations, female Olympians risk backlash simply for competing, their medals won against cultural currents far stronger than any opponent. The journey from exclusion to equality mirrors society's slow reckoning with gender itself. The Olympics didn't lead this change, they reflected it, sometimes reluctantly. But every time a gymnast like Biles defies physics or a sprinter like blazes past male-dominated record books, the games inch closer to their original ideal, a stage where human potential, not biology, writes the rules. The finish line, that's still ahead. But after a century of sprinting, women aren't just catching up, they're setting the pace. The starting gun at the Olympics has always fired 2 races simultaneously, one between athletes, the other between engineers. In 1912, Stockholm, the first electronic timing system replaced handheld stopwatches, slicing finish line disputes from seconds to hundredths. By 1964 Tokyo, photo finishes became pixel perfect, and Omega's Magic Eye starting blocks disqualified runners for false starts faster than any human could blink. These weren't just upgrades, they rewrote what it meant to be the fastest. When Jim Hins became the first man to break 10 seconds in the 100-meter dash at 1968 Mexico City, his 9.95 wasn't a record. It was a revelation, proving precision could push humans beyond imagined limits. Equipment evolved just as radically. Compare the wooden poles vaulters used in early games to today's carbon fiber rods, spring-loaded catapults that launch athletes over 6 meters high. Or consider archery, from hand-carved bows to stabilizers with laser sights, turning a medieval skill into aerospace-level accuracy. Even the humble running shoe became a physics lab, with Nike's soles in 2016 storing and returning energy like coiled springs, shaving minutes off marathon times until regulators stepped in. The line between innovation and advantage grew razor-thin, nowhere more than swimming. The LZR Racer suit at 2008 Beijing, woven with ultrasonic welded seams and water-repellent fabric, buoyed swimmers to 23 world records before being banned as technological doping. Broadcasting transformed the games from a live event into a global spectacle. Slow-motion replay, debuted at 1960 Grenoble, turned ski jumps into ballets of physics. In 2012 London, underwater cameras traced swimmers' every ripple, while motion-tracking graphics dissected sprinters' strides in real time. Yet the most profound shift might be social media. Tokyo 2020's empty stands mattered less when tick clips of skateboarders' flawless runs went viral, proving audiences no longer need stadiums to feel the Olympic pulse. Debates simmer beneath these advancements. Should Paralympic blade runners compete against able-bodied athletes? Are high-tech suits fair to nations that can't afford them? The Olympics have become a lab for these questions, testing whether technology should level the field or let athletes soar beyond natural limits. One thing's certain: when a gymnast's twist is measured by AI or a javelin's flight modeled in wind tunnels, we're no longer just watching sport. We're seeing the future, one where human potential is amplified but never replaced by the tools we create. Hosting the Olympics isn't just about gold medals and cheering crowds. It's a high-stakes financial gamble where the prize isn't a podium but economic transformation. Take Barcelona in 1992, where the Games became an urban revival. The city poured billions into crumbling docks and outdated roads, but the investment paid off spectacularly. Within a decade, tourism tripled and the once-neglected waterfront became a global hotspot. Those Olympic villas, they're now luxury condos. The stadium, a thriving concert venue. Barcelona didn't just host an event, it rewrote its future, proving the Games could be a catalyst for lasting prosperity. But for every Barcelona, there's an Athens. The 2004 Olympics left Greece with stadiums so expensive to maintain, they've become modern ruins, white elephants rotting under the Mediterranean sun. The bill, nearly €9 billion, a debt that still haunts the country 2 decades later. The difference wasn't just spending but strategy. Where Barcelona integrated venues into the city's fabric, Athens built sprawling complexes in suburbs with no post-games plan. The softball stadium abandoned its outfield littered with weeds. The canoe-kayak course, bone-dry, a concrete ghost. The lesson was brutal. Without foresight, Olympic glory can bankrupt a nation. The financial tightrope gets even dicier when you factor in overruns. London's 2012 budget ballooned to nearly £9 billion, whilst 2016 costs spiraled so wildly, unpaid workers staged riots. Yet Montreal's 1976 disaster still looms largest, a $1.5 billion debt that took 30 years to pay off, earned from a stadium nicknamed the Big O. Critics argue these budgets could fund hospitals or schools, but proponents counter that the Olympics force cities to fast-track infrastructure they'd neglect for decades. Seoul's 88 Games cleaned the Han River and expanded subways. Tokyo's 2020 Olympics accelerated earthquake-proofing projects. The real economic magic happens when the crowds leave. Salt Lake City turned its 2002 Winter Games into an annual sports tourism empire, while Calgary's 88 bobsled track still hosts world championships. But these successes hinge on something intangible: political will. Cities that pivot quickly, repurposing media centers into tech hubs or athlete housing into affordable homes, reap rewards. Those that do, they're left with decaying monuments to misplaced ambition. The question isn't whether hosting the Olympics costs too much, it's what you buy with that price tag. A global spotlight, sure, but lasting wealth, that requires more than 17 days of competition. It demands a vision that starts long before the torch arrives and burns bright long after it's gone. The financial podium, it turns out, is the hardest one to stand on. The Olympic stage has a way of crystallizing national identity in moments so vivid, they become folklore. Take the Miracle on Ice at 1980 Lake Placid, a scrappy U.S. hockey team of college kids toppling the Soviet Union's unstoppable professionals. On paper, it was just a semi-final win. But in the Cold War's shadow, that victory pulsed with symbolism, democracy's underdogs outworking a machine-built dynasty. For Americans, it wasn't just a game, it was a manifesto written on ice. Similarly, Jamaica's sprinting dynasty, from Bolt's lightning strikes to Shelley Fraser's pink-haired dominance, transformed a small Caribbean island into the world's speed capital. Their success isn't measured in medals alone, but in how they've rewritten the narrative of what a nation without vast resources can achieve. What's fascinating is how the games amplify voices that might otherwise go unheard. Ethiopia's running barefoot through Rome in 1960 wasn't just an athletic feat, it was a decolonization anthem in motion. When Fiji won its first ever gold in rugby sevens at 2016, the entire Pacific archipelago erupted in celebration, not just for the victory, but for the global recognition it brought. These moments reveal the Olympics' unique alchemy. They take regional pride and project it onto a planetary screen. A Slovakian shooter, a Mongolian judoka, a Qatari high jumper, each becomes an ambassador for cultures and histories far beyond the podium. Yet this stage also exposes uncomfortable truths. The medal table often mirrors geopolitical hierarchies, with wealthy nations dominating through funding and infrastructure. But every Olympiad delivers exceptions that sting the status. Kenya's distance runners training on dirt roads outlasting athletes from high-tech training centers. Refugee teams marching under the Olympic flag, their very presence a rebuke to borders. The games don't erase inequality, but they do spotlight it, and occasionally, spectacularly, defy it. The opening ceremony might be the distillation of this dynamic. Nations strut their heritage like peacocks, Tongan flag bearers glistening in coconut oil, the Dutch in blue suits, Bhutan's archers in hand-woven silk. For 2 weeks, the world becomes a living atlas, each uniform and anthem a thread in a larger tapestry. But the real magic happens when the uniforms come off. In the village, wrestlers from Iran and Israel break bread, runners from North and South Korea take selfies. The Olympics don't just reflect national identity. They create a space where those identities can collide, mingle, and sometimes, just sometimes, find common ground in the sweat and strain of competition. Perhaps that's the ultimate paradox. These games, born from city-states jockeying for prestige, have become both a for national pride and a force that transcends it. When Croatia's water polo team or New Zealand's rugby sevens squad stand on the podium, their tears aren't just for personal triumph. They're for every kid back home who now believes their small nation belongs on the world's biggest stage. The Olympics don't just celebrate who we are, they hint at who we might become. For all its gleaming ideals, the Olympics have always cast shadows, some so dark they threaten to eclipse the very flame that symbolizes the Games. The most infamous scandal unfolded in East Germany, where from the 1960s through the 80s, a state-sponsored doping program turned athletes into lab experiments. Young swimmers and sprinters, many still in their teens, were given anabolic steroids like oral without their knowledge, disguised as vitamin supplements. The results were horrific. Female athletes developing deep voices and male pattern baldness, some suffering liver damage and giving birth to children with severe deformities. When Sprinter won gold in 1986, the steroids had so ravaged her body that she later underwent gender reassignment, becoming. These weren't rogue coaches cutting corners. This was systemic abuse, orchestrated at the highest levels of government, all for the sake of medal counts and political propaganda. Yet doping scandals didn't end with the Cold War. The 2014 Sochi Winter Games exposed a breathtaking scheme. Russian officials tampered with urine samples by passing them through a hidden hole in the lab wall, swapping tainted specimens for clean ones overnight. The mastermind turned informant later described mixing cocktails of steroids with liquor to help athletes evade detection. The fallout was catastrophic. Russia banned from the 2018 Olympics, its athletes forced to compete under a neutral flag. But the damage ran deeper. Every clean athlete who'd lost to a doped competitor, every record set under false pretenses, these weren't just violations. They were betrayals of the very ideal had championed. That competition should be a contest of human potential, not pharmaceutical alchemy. Corruption has seeped into the Games' foundations too. The Salt Lake City bribery scandal of 1998 revealed how host cities wooed International Olympic Committee members with cash, scholarships, and even plastic surgery for their spouses. The rot wasn't isolated. Investigations into 2016 uncovered a web of kickbacks, with construction firms inflating costs by millions to line politicians' pockets. Meanwhile, migrant workers building Qatar's World Cup facilities, a blueprint for Olympic-scale projects, faced squalid conditions and unpaid wages, a grim reminder of how easily grand events exploit the vulnerable. Then there are the host cities left drowning in debt. Montreal's Olympic Stadium, nicknamed the Big O, took 30 years to pay off. Athens' 2004 venues became crumbling relics, their decay mirroring Greece's financial collapse. Even Tokyo 2020, delayed by pandemic, saw costs balloon to $15 billion, with one architect resigning over designs he called monuments to waste. The Olympics promise urban renewal, but too often deliver white elephants, stadiums with no post-games purpose, draining public coffers long after the crowds disperse. Human rights abuses stain the Games' modern legacy. China's 2022 Winter Olympics became a platform for sports washing, distracting from its persecution of Uyghur Muslims. Activists noted how host city Beijing evicted thousands to build facilities, while journalists faced surveillance for reporting on labor conditions. The irony is crushing. An event founded to celebrate unity now hosted by regimes accused of systemic oppression. These scandals aren't just stains on the Olympic banner, they're fractures in its foundation. When medals are bought rather than earned, when cities are bankrupted for 17 days of glory, when athletes are reduced to political pawns or lab rats, the Games risk becoming a parody of their own ideals. Yet for all the darkness, there's resilience. Reforms like the World Anti-Doping Agency and independent oversight committees are steps toward accountability. Like who exposed Russia's doping, prove that courage can challenge corruption. The Olympics, like humanity itself, are flawed, but the flame persists, not because it's pure, but because we keep believing it can be. The story of the Paralympics begins not with grand stadiums or global broadcasts, but with a quiet revolution in a British hospital ward. In 1948, as London hosted its first post-war Olympics, neurologist Sir Ludwig organized a modest archery competition for 16 wheelchair-bound World War II veterans at Stoke Hospital. His radical idea, that sports could be as vital to rehabilitation as medicine, that broken bodies still housed unbreakable spirits. No one could have imagined those humble arrows would launch a movement that would one day rival the Olympics themselves in sheer emotional power. Fast forward to Tokyo 2021. where the Paralympics dazzled with technological marvels like blade runners and AI-guided racing wheelchairs, watched by billions worldwide. This wasn't just evolution, it was a seismic shift in how society perceives disability. Athletes like Italy's, a fencer who lost both arms and legs to meningitis, became global icons not for overcoming adversity, but for redefining excellence on their own terms. Her titanium gripping the foil's victories screamed a truth the ancient Greeks never grasped. Ability isn't absence, it's adaptation. The Paralympics' rise mirrors society's halting progress toward inclusion. Early games were medicalized, with athletes grouped by disability type as if their conditions defined them. By the 90s, that framework shattered. When South African swimmer qualified for both the Olympics and Paralympics in 2008, her performances forced the world to ask, why separate these stages at all? Events like wheelchair rugby, colloquially called murder ball for its brutal intensity, demolished patronizing stereotypes, proving disability sports could be as thrilling as any able-bodied competition. Yet the Paralympics' greatest impact might be invisible. Every time a child sees Poland's born without a right forearm dominate table tennis against able-bodied Olympians, it rewires possibilities. When Japan's blind footballers navigate the pitch by echolocation, following bells in the ball and calls from guides, they teach us that perception isn't singular. These aren't inspirational stories in the saccharine sense. They're, in human ingenuity, demanding we expand our definition of athleticism itself. The numbers tell their own story. Rome 1960 hosted 400 athletes from 23 countries. Tokyo 2021 welcomed 4,500 from 163 nations, a tapestry of resilience spanning war amputees, cancer survivors, and those born with differences. The Games now feature sports tailored to extraordinary skills, goalball's silent intensity for the visually impaired, or para-ice hockey's brutal grace. This isn't disability sport. It's high-performance competition that happens to include bodies the Olympics historically excluded. What the Paralympics share with their ancient predecessor isn't just competition, but transformation. Where Olympia turned soldiers into athletes, the Paralympics turned patients into champions. Where Zeus's altar hosted sacrifices, Paralympic podiums host revelations about technology's potential, about societal barriers crumbling, about the raw truth that every human body, regardless of design, contains the capacity for greatness. The flame burns the same, but the light it casts is broader, brighter, and long overdue. The Olympics don't just live in stadiums, they live in our collective imagination, immortalized in the moments that spill beyond the finish line and into the stories we tell. Take Chariots of Fire, the 1981 film that turned a handful of runners from the 1924 Paris Games into icons. The slow-motion sprint across the beach, legs churning to synth-heavy score, didn't just capture a race, it crystallized the Olympic spirit itself. The agony and ecstasy of pushing limits, the clash of faith and ambition. That film's legacy isn't just in its 4 Oscars, it's in how it rewrote the visual language of sports cinema, proving that the Games could be as much about inner battles as podium finishes. Music has always been the Olympics' unofficial heartbeat. Who can hear the bombastic fanfare of John Williams's Olympic theme without picturing torchbearers cresting a hill or the swelling strings of Bugler's Dream without feeling the weight of a medal ceremony? These compositions aren't just background noise, they're emotional shorthand, cueing the world to collective moments of triumph. Even outside official soundtracks, the Games inspire anthems. Whitney Houston's soaring One Moment in Time for the 1988 Seoul Olympics, or the haunting beauty of Oceania at Athens 2004, where her dress unfurled like a living map of the world. Fashion, too, bends to the Olympic torch. From the sleek minimalism of 1972 Munich tracksuits to the bold, geometric designs of 2018's opening ceremony, the Games set global trends. Ralph's All-American ensembles for Team USA become instant classics, while Stella's eco-conscious kits for Team GB in 2016 proved sustainability could be stylish. The Olympics don't just dress athletes, they redefine what athleticism looks like, from Flo's neon leotards to Smith's raised fist in black leather. Literature and art have long mined Olympic drama for its mythic potential. Ancient poets like Pindar composed odes to victors, likening them to demigods, while modern authors like David Foster dissected the psychological toll of elite competition in essays like Both Flesh and Not. Even comic books couldn't resist. Captain America debuted in 1941 as a super soldier inspired by the perfect human specimen, ideal of Olympians. The game's narrative pull is universal. Underdogs, rivals, comebacks, each Olympiad spins new chapters in humanity's oldest story, the one where ordinary people touch the extraordinary. Perhaps the most unexpected cultural footprint lies in language itself. Phrases like Olympic effort or going for gold seep into everyday speech, while the game's symbols, the rings, the flame become shorthand for unity and perseverance. Cartoons parody the opening ceremonies, memes immortalize viral moments like Bolt's lightning pose, and video games like Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games let players step into the fantasy. The Olympics aren't just watched, they're absorbed, reinterpreted, and woven into the way we dream. What makes this cultural alchemy so potent is its duality. The games are both intensely personal, a gymnast's deep breath before a vault, and impossibly vast, a global village tuning in simultaneously. They remind us that every record broken, every tear shed on the podium is part of a larger tapestry, one that stretches back to Hercules' mythical labors and forward to whatever triumphs await in Lowe's Angels 2028. The Olympics don't just create champions. They create legends, and those legends in turn create us. The Olympic flame has weathered wars, bans, and revolutions over three, but its greatest test may lie ahead. As rising temperatures scorch host cities and construction costs spiral into billions, the games stand at a crossroads, adapt or risk becoming relics of a bygone era. Consider Tokyo 2020, where marathoners raced at dawn to avoid deadly heat, their bodies draped in ice vests while pavement temperatures hit 50 degrees Celsius. Or look to 2016, where Bay's polluted waters turned sailing into a health hazard, athletes slaloming through floating garbage. These aren't isolated incidents. They're warning flares in a world where climate change and urbanization threaten the very model of monolithic, city-centered Olympics. The solutions being debated are as radical as the problems. One proposal gaining traction is a permanent rotation of host cities across pre-approved sites with existing infrastructure. Imagine Athens, refurbished ancient stadiums anchoring summer games every 20 years, or the Swiss Alps cycling winter events between and. This Olympic heritage network could slash construction waste while letting venues develop lasting expertise. Another idea. Distributed hosting, where events scatter across regions or even continents. A 2032 Games might see surfing in Bali, archery in Mongolia, and track in Nairobi. A true global celebration that reduces travel emissions by putting athletes closer to home. Technology promises even bolder reinventions. Virtual reality could let gymnasts compete via motion capture suits while judges review performances in holographic detail, eliminating the need for massive arenas. Esports, already demonized for 2018's exhibition matches, might evolve into full medal events featuring digital decathlons blending physical and mental agility. And what if the torch relay went carbon neutral, carried not by jets but by satellite-linked drones projecting its image across continents? Yet innovation must walk hand in hand with tradition. The Olympics' magic lies in their tangible, sweaty humanity. The gasp of a crowd as a pole vaulter clears the bar, the collective groan when a sprinter false starts. Striking that balance means rethinking not just how we host the games, but why. Younger generations demand sustainability and social impact, values at odds with the current model's excess. Future bids might be judged not on stadium blueprints, but on legacy plans. Affordable housing converted from athlete villages or zero-waste policies enforced with blockchain tracking. The ultimate question is whether the Olympics will change, but whether they'll lead or follow. Ancient Olympia survived because it adapted, from adding new events to weathering Roman conquest. The modern games must now rewrite their playbook for an era of climate refugees and AI, where might someday include greener, smarter, fairer. One thing's certain: the flame that burned for Hercules and Jesse Owens won't flicker out quietly. It'll either light the way forward or expose what happens when tradition refuses to bend to a warming world. The olive wreath placed upon the head of an ancient Olympic champion carried more than leaves, it carried the weight of eternity. Unlike today's gold medals, which glint with temporary glory, those humble branches from Zeus's sacred grove symbolized something timeless, a victor's name etched into the collective memory of civilization. Fast forward to the 21st century, and the podium's shine may have changed, but the essence remains. When Biles lands a double pike or crosses the marathon finish line, they're not just making history. They're stepping into a continuum that stretches back to the first race in 776 before the Common Era. The Olympics don't just endure, they echo. Each game's a new verse in humanity's oldest poem about striving, failing, and rising again. What's astonishing isn't just the longevity of the games, but their elasticity. They've absorbed seismic shifts, from the fall of empires to the rise of feminism, from amateur idealism to professional spectacle, without shattering. Consider the marathon, an event invented for the modern Olympics yet rooted in legend. When Louis won it in 1896, he ran through olive groves much like his ancient predecessors. When Kenya's broke the 2-hour barrier in 2019, he wore space-age shoes and chased a laser pace car. The distance connects them across centuries, proving the Olympics can honor tradition while embracing revolution. This duality plays out in quieter ways too. The ancient truce, which paused wars so athletes could compete, finds its modern counterpart in the Olympic Village, where geopolitical rivals share cafeterias and gyms. In 2018, North and South Korean athletes marched under a unified flag, their temporary harmony a flicker of the ancient spirit. Even the game's darkest moments, like the Nazi propaganda of Berlin '36 or the Cold War boycotts, ultimately underscored their resilience. Scandal and strife don't destroy the Olympics, they reveal why we need them. Yet the true legacy lies beyond medals or records. It's in the way a Jamaican bobsled team can inspire a nation without snow, or how a refugee athlete who swam for survival in the Aegean Sea can later swim for glory in. The Olympics amplify stories that redefine possibility, proving that the arena is as much a mirror as a stage. When scored her perfect 10 in 1976, she didn't just elevate gymnastics. She shattered ceilings for every girl told her dreams were too big. The Flames' survival through isn't a miracle of logistics. It's a testament to an idea too potent to extinguish. In a world fractured by borders and ideologies, the games remain a rare space where the rules are agreed upon, the playing field is level, and the only currency is excellence. They remind us that for all our differences, we still gather to marvel at the human body's grace, the mind's focus, the spirit's refusal to yield. The stadiums may grow taller, the broadcasts sharper, but the heart of the Olympics still beats where it always has, in that breathless moment when the gun fires, the crowd roars, and the world holds its breath to see what we're capable of. The Olympic flame has never been just about fire, it's about the stories that light refuses to let fade. From the dust of ancient Olympia to the neon glow of Tokyo's skyline, these games have been a mirror held up to humanity, best and boldest instincts. Think about it, a cook named sprinting to victory in 776 before the Common Era couldn't have imagined his name would echo across. Any more than Jesse Owens knew his 4 gold medals in Nazi Germany would become a rebuke to tyranny. That's the magic of the Olympics. They're not just competitions. They're time capsules, preserving our struggles, our breakthroughs, and our unshakable belief that greatness isn't bound by era or border. Yet for all their grandeur, the game's true power lies in their contradictions. They're a stage where brutal rivalries unfold under banners of unity, where cutting-edge technology meets traditions carved in marble. When a Paralympian races her wheelchair past the Parthenon, or when a skateboarder like Sky Brown lands a trick that defies physics, they're not just making history, they're rewriting what history can include. The Olympics have always been a work in progress, flawed and magnificent, just like the civilizations that host them. So what do we carry forward from this journey? Perhaps it's the understanding that the games are never truly about the medals, but the metaphors. The starting blocks that level princes and paupers. The torch relays that weave through war zones and wheat fields alike. The silent pact that for 17 days every 2 years, the world agrees to measure itself not in weapons or wealth, but in winged feet and soaring spirits. The Olympics remind us that our oldest traditions aren't anchors holding us back. They're lighthouses, guiding us toward what we might yet become. As the flame dims on this exploration, it leaves us with one indelible truth. The Olympics endure because we need them to. In a fractured world, they offer a rare language everyone speaks, a grammar of grit and grace written in sweat and sacrifice. Whether you're a history buff, a sports fanatic, or just someone who loves a good underdog story, the games belong to you. They're our shared inheritance, and their next chapter is ours to write. So here's to the victories we've celebrated, the scandals we've survived, and the dreams still taking shape in gyms and playgrounds everywhere. The stadiums may empty, the crowds may disperse, but that flame, it's forever. Now it's your turn. What Olympic moment made you believe in the impossible? Drop your favorites in the comments, and if this journey through time sparked your curiosity, hit like, subscribe, and let's keep the conversation going. After all, the Olympics were never meant to be watched in silence. They're a chorus, and your voice